Well, good morning. Welcome to Catalyst. My name is Bill. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of our worship service, whether you are physically sitting here in our sanctuary or whether you are watching us online on our live stream during this or after. I guess you really can't watch it before. That would be weird, right? Yeah, so if you happen to be watching it right now or you're catching into the replay later, welcome. Thank you for being here and being a part of our church. So here at Catalyst, we're about one thing, and that is loving people to life change in Christ. Those four words. We love you to life change in Christ. Life change implying that we don't need to stay the same way we are now. And in Christ meaning that He is the impetus or He is the causal agent in why we change and how we change. And one of the ways in which we change to be like Christ is studying His Word together. And as you just saw in the video there, we're going to be continuing our study in the book of Ruth. So I want to invite you to take your Bibles and turn or tap with me to the book of Ruth. You can find it right after Joshua, Judges, Ruth. We're going to be in chapter 3. While you are turning to Ruth chapter 3, let's just quickly review the big Bible story that gets us into the book of Ruth. So again, you're turning to Ruth chapter 3 and also answering my questions. This is a multitasking quiz. Here we go. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God creates all things. Into a land called Eden, He places a garden in which He places two human beings, Adam and Eve. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve disobey God. They therefore sin. They are kicked out of the garden, and then they begin life in a fallen world. That's chapter 3, chapter 4. Fast forward to chapter 9. God sends a flood, and in order to redeem humanity from the flood, He tells a man to build an ark. That man's name is Noah. Noah had how many sons? 3. See, there's a question I didn't ask you last week. Got to be on your toes. Noah had 3 sons. So Noah, his 3 sons, and all of their wives, when the flood is over. By the way, in case anybody realizes this, the flood wasn't just on the earth for 40 days. It rained for 40 days. But the flood waters covered the earth for over a year. So just so we're getting a timeline there. It was a whole year of the earth being under flood waters. Then the flood waters recede. They eventually leave the ark. Humanity is restarted. Fast forward to Genesis 12. God selects a man who's living in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. He tells him, I want you to move to the land that I will show you. You're going to be my people. I'm going to be your God. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. Look around to the north, south, east, and the west. All of this land I will give to your descendants. That man's name was changed to Abraham. Then that same covenant promise is repeated to one of Abraham's sons, the son of promise. So not Ishmael, but Isaac. Isaac likewise has 2 sons, but the covenant promises are only repeated to the one of them. Not Esau, but Jacob. Jacob then has 12 sons, and one of his 11 older brothers sell one of them into slavery. That gets us to the Joseph story, which is the end of the book of Genesis. At the end of the book of Genesis, all of the people of Israel, so Jacob and all of his children and his grandchildren, they move into the land of Egypt. They live there for 400 years. And then all of a sudden, there is a Pharaoh who did not know the great things Joseph did. They enslave the Hebrew people. They cry out to their God for a deliverer. God hears their prayers, sends them a deliverer who was raised in Egypt but spent 40 years watching sheep in the land of Midian. That man's name is Moses. Moses' older brother was named Aaron, and their sister was named Miriam. Together, Moses and Aaron, they speak to Pharaoh, the 10 plagues. Miriam leads the women of Israel in praising Yahweh as they leave. They part on dry ground, the what sea? The Red Sea. They leave, and unfortunately, it'd be great if I could just tell you they obeyed, but they didn't. And so there's 40 years of wilderness wandering. An entire generation falls away. God raises up a new man to lead His people. The man who leads the children of Israel into the promised land's name is Joshua. That's correct. So Joshua leads them into the land, and then they begin to take over the land, but they still disobey God. And then that gets us to the Judges period. So at this period of biblical history, the children of Israel have been redeemed from Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. They've wandered for 40 years. They've moved into Canaan. And then the main theme of the book of Judges is everyone does what is right in his own eyes. The book of Ruth takes place during the end of the Judges period. So those of you who have been with us a while, you know that the monarchy period is coming. The monarchy hasn't happened yet. So we're still living in the land that God has promised his children, but they're living in disobedience, everyone is doing what was right in their own eyes. And then we get to the book of Ruth. So here's the key thought that brings the whole book of Ruth together. The story of Naomi's restoration is the setting of Ruth's redemption and inclusion in the people of God. And I phrased that very clearly. The story of Naomi's restoration is the setting for Ruth's redemption and inclusion in the people of God. Biggest thing I learned about the book of Ruth as I prepared for this sermon series is Ruth is not the primary character in the book of Ruth. Even though the book bears her name and she is a key character in the story, the primary figure in the book of Ruth is actually Naomi. How do I know that? Because the book begins and ends talking about Naomi, and every chapter in the book begins and ends talking about Naomi. Ruth is in the story and a large part of the story, but you can't just say the book is only about Ruth because there are other characters here. Naomi is an Israelite widow coming back to Bethlehem after following her husband and moving away, and her husband and her sons both die. Ruth is a childless daughter-in-law and now widow, the daughter-in-law of Naomi. And then last week we met Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy relative of Elimelech, who was Naomi's husband, and he is a landowner who lives in or near the land or the city of Bethlehem. And then the setting, I already said this, the book of Ruth takes place during the Judges period. So let's read all of chapter 3 together, and then we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to walk through it piece by piece. Here we go. Ruth chapter 3, starting in verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed me earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her, and he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me this 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." So, let's rewind back to verse 1. A couple of very interesting things develop in this chapter. So first, in verse 1, notice the words "one day." So if we're following the story chronologically, there is an undisclosed or an undetermined amount of time between the end of what you and I are calling chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. Remember that when the book of Ruth was originally written, there were no chapters, there were no verse notations. All of that was added hundreds of years after the time of Jesus so that we could do exactly what we're doing today and study sections of Scripture. Remember also when Scripture was written, it was on scrolls, not in a book. The books weren't invented then either. So we're getting the advantage of history playing out. So here, one day, meaning some amount of time has passed. What are they doing during that time? Well, chapter 2 leaves off with Boaz telling Ruth that she is allowed to glean in all of his fields, whether it's the earlier harvest or now here, with the wheat harvest or the barley harvest. So she's been doing that this whole time. Implied is Ruth is following in obedience to what Naomi has asked her to do and what Boaz has graced her or given her the privilege of doing. And then one day, as they're going about their regular day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." First, notice the way Naomi is described in relation to Ruth, Ruth's mother-in-law. And then notice Naomi's responsibility of Ruth. I must find a home for you. Remember that in chapter 1, Naomi followed her husband Elimelech over to Moab. Then Elimelech dies. Then both Mahlon and Chilion, the sons, die. And now you're left with Naomi being responsible for Ruth and Orpah. Now she tries to send them home and say, it would be better for y'all to go back to your mother's house and have them find you new husbands. Orpah ultimately leaves. Ruth says, no, I go where you go. Your God is my God. Your people, my people. I die where you die. So that was Ruth's faith statement of chapter 1. Now what's playing out here is Naomi's faith statement to Ruth, saying, I must find a home for you. You are still my daughter-in-law. I am still responsible for you. I must find a home where you will be well provided for. Verse 2. Now, Boaz, notice the link there. Home well provided for. Now, Boaz, whose women you have worked with, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So notice the thematic link. I got to find a home well provided for. Hey, remember that dude Boaz. So the undertone here, wink, 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 is that Boaz is the home where Ruth can be or will be well provided for. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the words winnowing and threshing, let me explain this. We are anywhere from 1290 to 1000 BC. There is no John Deere, right? They're not going to the back 40, pulling out the Kubota and pulling out in order to collect. So what are they doing? At this day, in this era, what they would do is they would harvest, let's say it's wheat or barley. They'd harvest the whole stalk. Then they would bring it into this threshing floor. I want you to imagine a building, most likely square, at the top of a hill where the walls come up to about my height, and then there is an air gap, and then there's the roof. Here's the reason why. What they would do is they would take a winnowing fork. Think of just a really big farming fork, right? And you would pound the stalks. What does that do? That looses the barley, which then starts to fall. So you would pound, and then you would take the fork and you would toss it up above your head. The reason that the threshing floor is on the top of a hill is the breeze is going to cross. Remember that air gap I told you about? As you toss up the very light stalks, the breeze catches them and it takes them out of the building, almost like an exhaust. Whereas the heavy barley falls to the floor. And the longer you do this, pound, lift and throw, breeze. Pound, lift and throw, breeze. What you're doing is you're separating the wheat from the chaff, or you're separating the barley from the chaff. That's when you get to the New Testament and Jesus talks about the separating wheat from the chaff. It's all built on this analogy right here. This is back-breaking work, but it's done in a celebratory fashion because the step after the threshing floor is the harvest feast, right? The step after Boaz separates the barley from the part they don't eat is, bro, it's time to get down. Like, somebody call Kim, we're going to make some barley cupcakes, and it's time for a party. So that's what the winnowing fork is, what actually pounds and throws. The threshing floor is the building itself with the walls that have the air gap where the air would pull away the light parts and the heavier parts would fall down. And so what he is doing is the final process of harvesting. It's not just cutting it out from the field. If anybody's ever, anybody ever eaten like actual corn, not out of a can. You have to collect it, then you have to shuck it, then you have to clean it. So this is the final step of preparing it. And he's going to be doing this at night. Why? Because it's cooler and because he's taking advantage of the breeze, separating. All of that works together. And it's really kind of a one or two man job. Other times in the book of Judges, like in the story of Gideon, when we're talking about the Philistines oppressing the people of God, Gideon is threshing, which is the separating. But Gideon is threshing in a wine press. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot to you and me today, but in their day and age, they understood a wine press is down in a valley. It's hidden. It's covered. A threshing floor is at the top of a hill. Just geographically, these are two very different places. Why is Gideon threshing in a wine press? Because he's doing it in secret, because he's an oppressed person. Why is Boaz threshing on the winning floor? Because here he's blessed of God, and he is celebrating his harvest. So all of that is taking place in verse 2. Tonight he will be winnowing barley, or tossing it up in the air and allowing the wind to help separate the barley from the chaff on the threshing floor. Verse 3. Wash, perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. Now, obviously the first part of wash, dress, get your best clothes. Okay, so here's the deal. There is some debate about what this word best means, because the best clothes is also one that keeps one warm. So it's probably her best outfit with a large cloak over it. Now, the cloak is probably one of her nicest pieces of clothing, but it's also a piece of clothing that conceals identity, right? If I put a big cloak and a big hood on, and you see somebody walking by from the other side of the back 40, you're not really going to know who that is. And she's trying to present herself as best as possible. And then don't let him finish until he has finished eating and drinking. Naomi wants to put Ruth in the best possible scenario to have this conversation with Boaz. Now, let me get to verse 4, and then everybody's going to get uncomfortable. So here we go. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. That sounds kind of weird, right? All right, so there are two takes on verse 4. Going to look for who's the youngest person in the room. Right? Okay, so the term uncover his feet is an obscure term in Hebrew. It's a phrase, but it could also mean just what it means literally. So there are some commentators who are going to say, and they're not wrong, so in Hebrew, to uncover one's feet is to expose male genitalia. Right? So I'll use adult level words. So when David is hiding in a cave and Saul comes in, and David is recounting to his mighty men that he had the opportunity to kill Saul. Saul went into the cave and uncovered his feet. That means that Saul went into the cave in order to relieve himself, right? That was the uncover. Why uncover his feet? Bro, because we wear really long robes. Right? It's not like you and I today where we have a belt buckle and a zipper. You have to pull up the robe in order to relieve yourself. So you're literally uncovering your feet in order to get to your junk, right? Can I say that as an adult term? I told you everybody's going to be uncomfortable. So when this says, go and uncover his feet, one interpretation is literally uncover his feet. Expose his genitalia. Here's the problem with the phrase. It also can literally mean uncover his feet. And I talked to several people this week to try and get a modern day English rendition. So I've got two for you. So depending on what generation you're in, if you were out and you were dating someone and someone said to the other person, hey, you want to go back to my place? Right? All of you who just giggled, you know exactly what that phrase means. Are we actually just going to my place, or are we going to my place? For those of you who don't get that, if somebody asks you to Netflix and chill, right? Right? There's the rest of my people right there. I got you. If somebody says, hey, you want to Netflix and chill? Are we really just watching Netflix documentaries? Probably not. That's what this phrase means. So in ancient Hebrew, when we say uncover his feet, those of you who get back to my place, those of you who get Netflix and chill, that's what this means. The problem is, it's not always exactly that. Sometimes you're literally just going back to someone's place. Sometimes, on the off chance, you're literally just watching true crime documentaries on Netflix. So we have to ask ourselves, with what everything else we have in this chapter, which one makes more sense? So we have two competing theories of what's going on in this chapter. Theory one is that Naomi has prepared Ruth and is sending her to Boaz's workplace as a prostitute. Theory two is that Naomi is preparing Ruth to be a godly woman and ask Boaz to take her as a wife. These are the two competing theories. Now, depending on which commentary you read, you're going to read both. That's why I want to pitch them both. I don't think both survive the rest of the chapter. I'll just let you in on that. I think one of them makes way more sense out of the rest of the verses than the other does. But I would be remiss as a Bible teacher if I didn't use the word junk in a sermon, because I can't, right? So that's what verse 4. So when she says, go uncover his feet and lie down, if you're in camp A, that she's being sent in like a prostitute, that's what she's doing. She's uncovering his feet to literally lie next to or on him. If she's going as a godly woman to make a proposal, she is waiting for Boaz to recognize her. So she uncovers his feet because it's cold. She needs him to wake up in the middle of the night. So the uncover his feet is the probative one in verse 4. Then Ruth just says, listen, I'll do whatever you say, to Naomi. Fine, Mom, if this is what you say is best. Remember, Ruth is not in her home culture. She's home, but not her hometown. Ruth was a Moabite. She's now in Israelite territory following Israelite customs. Verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and she did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. 7, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. So if you're in camp A, Ruth is waiting for him to get drunk enough to take advantage of her. If you're in camp B, Ruth is waiting for him to be calm. He's eat, he's drank. She wants to make a very serious request, and she doesn't want any distractions. So you see there, now you interpret verse 4, totally changes how you read verse 7. Then verse 8, in the middle of the night, something startled the man. Here's where I think the prostitute angle's got a little bit of a difficulty. You want me to believe in verse 7 that she uncovered him all the way to the waist and began to take advantage of him, but he didn't wake up. Like when verse 8 says, in the middle of the night, something startled the man, he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. You mean to tell me that she raped him in his sleep and he didn't notice? And then woke up later and went, hey, there's a woman at my feet. You like, how'd that get down there? I have a problem with the text, right? We got to take the text as it is, and it's okay to look at multiple interpretations, but I have a problem with camp A when we get to verse 8, because Boaz does not know Ruth is there until he wakes up in the middle of the night. So he sees a woman lying at his feet and then immediately asks, who are you? Why does he ask that? Because it's nighttime and there's no batteries. Okay? It's dark. Who are you? She immediately answers, I am your servant Ruth. There's no concealing her identity to Boaz. Now, verse 9, spread the corner of your garment over me. Stop. If you're in camp A and you see her making a lewd and inappropriate gesture, she's literally asking to come inside of his clothing so that they can have sex. That's what she's saying. Spread the corner of your garment over me. And if that was all that it was and she was speaking in English, that might be plausible. But let me tell you why I don't think you can read it that way. The words for spread your garment over me in Hebrew are literally the same words that Boaz used in the previous chapter to describe Ruth under the wing of God. It's the same exact. She uses the same words he used When he blessed her and said, may you find covering under God, may God spread his wings over you, same exact Hebrew words for Boaz spreading his garment over her. She's saying back to him what he already said to her about God. I got a hard time fitting that in with the prostitute sex angle when he uses those words to speak about God. I mean, you got to really be wanting this to be naughty to bend it that far. Right? So when she says, spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. She is not just because we're both here and there's some Netflix, right? She's not making a physical, bodily, fleshly human argument. She's saying, allow me to come under your wing, same exact Hebrew words, because you are the redeemer of my family. You are the redeemer of our clan. That doesn't feel like an offer of sex. That feels like, will you please allow me to become part of your... She's literally saying, will you please take me as your wife? That's what she's saying there. Then verse 9, the Lord, all capital letters. Here's the other reason why I have a hard time accepting the sex angle. If Boaz is in the middle of the threshing floor and some random woman is coming and offering herself to him in the middle of the night, is he going to stop to pray about it? Right? I mean, just be honest. The words here, the Lord bless you. This kindness is greater than you showed me earlier. Notice that word kindness there. Remember I told you there's a Hebrew word that's a main theme in the book of Ruth. It's chesed. Thank you, Melissa, for teaching me how to pronounce Hebrew correctly. So that word chesed, we talked about it last week. Faithfulness, the loyal love of God. Right there. This chesed is greater than you showed me earlier. Ruth is being praised by Boaz for faithfulness. And what is the faithfulness? That you've showed me even better because you could have run after younger men. Now, I also have to point out here in verse 10, this is clear evidence that Boaz is older than Ruth. There's no way you get out of the idea that they're star-crossed teen lovers. You just can't have that. Because remember, Ruth is already a widow after being 10 years married. So she got married anywhere from, let's just call it 14 to 16, which kind of would be older for this culture at this age. And then she's been married for 10 years. And widowed. She's minimum 24 to 26. I would say Boaz, in the way he's portrayed in the book, he's a wealthy landowner. He has servants who oversee some of his other servants. I'm going to say Ruth is no older than 26. And Boaz is probably no older than 55, but could be possibly as young as 46. Because he's saying, Ruth, like, you totally could have had a younger man. Like, and the fact that you are going to bless me with the opportunity to take you as my wife. He's the one pointing out the age difference. And the reason that he points it out is because he wants God to bless her. I don't see how Boaz says that if this is an offer of secret sex. I don't see why God bless you for acting like a prostitute while I'm at work. Right? That just doesn't ring as true to the text. Also, I do have to point out one of the other reasons that Boaz is saying for Ruth to be blessed is that when she marries Boaz, the first child that Ruth will bear will belong to her deceased husband Mahlon. That's what a guardian redeemer is. The first child of Boaz and Ruth belongs as Mahlon's son, not Boaz's son. That's part of the reason why she's blessed. She is willing to marry the older man to make sure that her deceased husband has a descendant. Now, we talked about that part last week. We don't do that with brother-in-laws in our culture, but in this culture, it's a very different setting. And Boaz and Ruth both understand what's happening here. Then you get to verse 11. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do all you ask. So again, if you're in the prostitute category, he's saying, yeah, we can just totally have sinful, illicit sex after praising God for your faithfulness. Right? All the people of my town will know that you are a woman of noble character. Do women of noble character offer themselves as prostitutes in the middle of the night at men's workplaces? No. So again, hard time seeing this view if we're going to take the whole text. I think now remember when I told you that in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Ruth is in a different location This is why that's important, right? So in our English Bibles, you find the book of Ruth after Joshua, then Judges, then Ruth. Why is it there? Because chronologically, the book of Ruth takes place during the Judges period. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But why do the English Bible order the books the way they do? Because our English Bibles are all ordered off of the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, which means the Greeks ordered their books the way they ordered them, and that's why our English books are ordered that way. However, the original Hebrew Bible, or the Tanakh, which is what it's called in Hebrew, is not ordered the same way. The book of Ruth is in the third section in the Tanakh, which is the writings, and the book of Ruth comes right after the book of Proverbs, which means there is a thematic or a theological link between the way the book of Proverbs ends, which any woman who's been to a Proverbs 31 Bible study, you know the book of Proverbs ends talking about what? The woman of noble character. Same exact words as here in verse 11. So with that theological link that Ruth is the living, breathing Proverbs 31 woman, I got to put Camp A to bed. It doesn't make sense. It's fun, got a good laugh out of it, and I think the reason people hold on to it is they want to see illicit, sinful things in Scripture, but holding on to that view doesn't make sense with the rest of the text. So at this point, we're going to put that to bed. There's no way you can have Boaz viewing Ruth as a woman of noble, godly character and have the illicit sex view of this chapter at the same time. You've got to decide that one is true and then ignore the facts on the other side. So there's verse 11. Verse 12. Although it is true, now look at this. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of your family, there is another that is more closely related than I. This is Boaz admitting, Ruth, I would love to redeem you, but I'm not first in line. So here's Boaz's character saying, listen, we have to follow and do what is right. And there is somebody who is more closely related than I. Now, if we were in the ancient audience and we were reading this story for the first time, this is the dum-dum-dum moment of the story, right? This whole time, Boaz has been laid up as the redeemer character. Ruth has been laid up as the woman who's going to be redeemed. And Naomi's like, listen, our culture, we have this thing, and we're going to find this guy, and he's going to be wealthy, and you're going to be provided for. Boaz isn't first in line. What are we going to do? Right? This is the dramatic pause, cut, go get more popcorn, right? This is that dramatic moment for the original readers because they understood now that it doesn't matter if Boaz loves Ruth. He's not allowed to marry her first because tradition has to rule over this transaction. Then you get to 13. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Now, somebody asked me this week, do I think that at this moment in the story that Boaz loves Ruth? And I'm going to say that that's a hard question to answer because you're asking me to extrapolate from beyond what the text says. The text is describing Boaz's actions, not Boaz's feelings. What I will say is his actions are motivated by something. They are either motivated by A, true, genuine romantic love for Ruth, that is possible. B, a true commitment to the law and to righteousness and tradition. Or AB, right? Boaz's commitment to the law and him being a righteous man does not exclude the fact that he may also want to marry Ruth, but it does not automatically include it. So I'm going to let you have A or B, or you can put them together, PBJ, and have an AB. Either way, Boaz is doing everything he can to protect Ruth, keeps her in his fields, orders all of his men not to treat her poorly. Why? Because she's the racial outcast. She's the Moabite living among the Israelites. She don't belong here. You ain't one of us. He's protecting her. He's providing for her. Even here in 13, stay here for the night. And then if he doesn't, I will lie here until morning. Then 14, so she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. Why? Because if 2,000 years later, we're still wondering if this was a Netflix and chill hookup, you better believe the people the next morning totally did. Right? Boaz is keeping her here to protect her. Now, if you're in Camp A, then you would say Boaz is keeping her to protect him, right? Not her. because he's the one who's accepting the offer of illicit sex, that, again, it's possible, it's not believable to me. So then, before anyone can be recognized, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. Why? Because it's inappropriate. They live in a highly righteous society. You can't just have illicit sex whenever you want and call it okay. Then 15, also, bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out. When he did so, he poured 6 measures of barley and placed it on her. This gives Ruth a reason to be walking home from the threshing floor. Boaz is providing for her in the same way that he has since chapter 1. There's no need to read in some sort of 50 Shades of Ruth to make this make sense. He is providing for her, and who else is he providing for? Naomi. Remember, the chapter begins and ends with Naomi. So then she goes back to town. Then 16, 17, and 18, here's the final conversation with Naomi. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law Naomi, how did it go? She told him everything that Boaz had done for her. That's a weird conversation if you're in Camp A, just saying, right? We'll just leave that one there. I don't know about your relationship with your mother-in-law, but I don't think that is a morning conversation. Then he gave 6 measures of barley. Don't go back to your mother empty-handed. I looked up how much 6 measures. We're talking 50 to 60 pounds of grain. Homegirl was fit. And what does the grain do? The grain not only provides for Ruth, it provides for Naomi. Then look at in verse 18, here's Naomi's statement of faith. Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. What does Naomi trust in? Naomi trusts in Boaz's character. Can you really believe that at the beginning of the chapter, Naomi queued up Ruth like a harlot, but at the end of the chapter, she trusts in Boaz's righteousness? I just don't see it. I don't see how you have both. If you believe that Boaz is willing to accept an offer of illicit sex in the middle of the night, then there's no reason to believe in verse 18 that he is the righteous redeemer who will redeem her according to tradition. If you believe that Ruth was sent in to request marriage, then it is reasonable to believe that Boaz maintained righteousness for him and for Ruth. So that's the camp that I'm in. But I wanted you to see it play out through the whole chapter so that when somebody comes back to you and says, yeah, that was totally a 50 Shades moment. Like, really? Does that really make sense with the whole chapter? Does it make sense with the theme of where we've been so far? About Naomi coming home from Moab and being redeemed from the sinful choices of her husband. How do I include sinful choices of a husband here when the book started by redeeming the sinful choices of a husband in chapter 1? How do I explain the chesed, the loyal love of God that bleeds through every chapter of this book? God's loyal love in drawing Naomi home. God's loyal love in using Boaz to provide for Ruth and Naomi. And now here, Ruth's loyal love to the clan of Elimelech by saying, you are my guardian redeemer. Will you accept me? Knowing that she's the racial outsider, knowing that there's a massive age gap. Boaz could have said no. Whether you're in the sex camp or the redemption camp, he still could have said no. So as I bring this one in for a landing, here, let me give you your takeaway. Worship team, ushers, if you guys will all get ready, please. Here's your takeaway. Ruth and Boaz are living examples of the loyal love in action. We must strive to reflect the faithfulness of God in our culture today. What I love about this book, and I have to be honest, I have never studied this book at depth until I got ready for this particular series. I've heard a sermon on Ruth or Boaz here and there. You know, usually at a women's conference or women's study, we love to bring out Ruth, but never to this depth of really getting at the tradition and the family of what's going on. The chesed, the loyal love of God, is portrayed in Naomi coming home. It's portrayed in Boaz providing for them both. It's portrayed in Ruth's commitment to the clan of Elimelech. And ultimately, it will be fulfilled next chapter, next Sunday, when we see how the loyal love of God plays out through Boaz and the conversation with the primary kinsman redeemer and why he passes, and that now Boaz is allowed to fulfill what happens here in chapter 3. My question for you is this: can you look at all of this loyalty? Can you look at all of this love and then measure yourself against it? Do you and I live out as reflections the loyal love of God in our culture today? When people see, and let's just say husbands and wives, right? When people see the two of you together, do they see a loyal, godly love? Or do they see a mechanical partnership? Children with your parents, do they see a loyal love both ways? That parents are loyal to their children and children are loyal to their parents? Those of you who are adults who have older parents, is there the loyal love of God portrayed in your family? I have to be honest, in my family, it's not always been that way. Many of you know my story. My mother died when I was a child. My father gave me away to my aunt and uncle, and I carried that ouchie and that scar and that hurt, trying to be a young man growing up in a world where I didn't have my own dad as a positive male figure, so I had to learn in the negative instead of the positive. That was hard. And those of you who come to men's fraternity, we talk about that sometimes, the image of manhood on the inside as it gets scarred. And now as a husband and a father of my own family, striving to exemplify that chesed, that faithfulness and loyal love. My children know one thing for certain. Actually, they probably know two things for certain. Number one, when mom and dad disagree, there's a 98% chance that mom's right. I would say my children know that. Number two, God help the man who tries to get between me and my wife, right? I will tear them to pieces and burn them on an altar and not feel bad about it. Not because they're my enemy, but because I love my wife so much. That loyal faithfulness, nothing comes between me and my wife. Do you exemplify the loyal faithfulness of God in the way that you live? Because I guarantee you one thing, and I'm striving and trying, and those of you who are younger and are better at social media, please feel free to give me tips and tricks. I'm trying to engage in the way our culture thinks. And what I've realized is our culture prizes individuality, individual determination so much that we have devalued loyalty and community. We value so much, I get to self-determine every aspect of my life, that I'm going to self-determine myself right into loneliness. I'm going to self-determine myself and destroy all of the other relationships around me. Why? Because I've made an idol out of self-determination. Whereas I don't have a problem with that. My identity starts in my marriage and then expands to my family. Then it expands to my church family, right? My identity is built in my community, not by myself. The culture that we live in today desperately needs to see the loyal love of God on the faces of our marriages, in our churches, and in our community, because there are plenty of people who don't experience that kind of loyal love. If we can take one thing out of the book of Ruth, it's that one man can change a family. One family can change a church. One church can change a community. And one community can change a country. But we have to be willing to step up and be those people and be that loyal love, that chesed faithfulness day in and day out.